Welcome, I'm Jane from Computer Science Cafe. In this video, I will be covering one of my favorite topics, lists in Python. To me, this is where coding starts to get powerful, when all these introductory skills start coming together. Please help support this channel by clicking subscribe and like. Let's get started. There are three different types of Python arrays we will cover. Firstly, there are dictionaries. These have a key and a value. Secondly, there are tuples. These are a list of values that you cannot change. And lastly, my favorite, Python lists. We will cover dictionaries and tuples in the next video. Here we will look at lists. Okay, let's get coding. Lists are like variables, but you can hold multiple values in a list. To create a new list, simply give it a name. List naming conventions are the same as variable naming conventions, then use the square brackets to create your list. In the list, you can then place multiple values separated by a comma. If you put your value in speech marks, then it is a string. If you want to use numbers, then simply leave the speech marks out. You can also mix numbers and strings in the same list. We can then print this list exactly the same as you would print a variable. In this example list we have four values: computer, phone, 101 and speaker. The position of each value within the list is called the index. Lists start with the index of 0. To take a further look at using list index, we can print specified index values. Here we are printing the value from index 1 by stipulating the list position to print within the square brackets. Lists start from index 0, so we can see here that index 1 holds the value of phone. We can also print a range of values from a list by stipulating the index range. Here we print from index 1 to 3, however note that the output will not include index 3. In the terminal we can see the print includes index 1 and 2 only. We can also print values starting from the end of the list using the -1 index. If you do not know how big the list is, then this is a useful method to identify values starting from the end of the list, and here we have the print of speaker. The second to last item is -2. Now let's comment out this code and have a look at some further list methods, such as printing each value of a list in a loop. Bringing the list back out of the commented section. Now creating a for loop to iterate through each index in the list. We can use the len method to identify the number of loops. Len will return the number of indexes in the list. In this example, this will then loop 4 times as the example list has 4 indexes. Inside this loop, we can use the value of I to print each position within the list individually. Remember that on the first loop the value of I is 0, so in this case index 0 will print, which is computer. On the second loop the value of I is 1, so the next item in the list will print, which is phone, and so on until each item is printed. This is much neater than printing the list in list format. Next, let's look at ways of adding values to a list. We can add values to a list by using the append method. This will add a new value to the end of a list. So my list.append, then inside the brackets the value that you want to add. Printing this, we can see it works. If I expand the terminal here, we can now see the value of PC is in the last index of the list. Next we can look at the same principle, but this time taking a user input and appending the value to the list. So to add a value to this list, I will create a new variable called item, make it an input, then give the user a prompt to add a new value. We can then use the append method to add the content of this variable to the end of our list. Let's check this works by printing the list. Running this program, we are now prompted to add a new value, so let's add a camera, and then we can see from the output that the value is now in the last index in the list. Next, let's reprint this list, but in a more user-friendly way, again using a for loop to loop for the length of the list, but this time I will use the value of I to give each item a number. Because I is an integer, I need to do the string of I, then let's put a space in to create a gap between the number and the item, and then I can add the index of the list for position of I. Oops, let's just correct this. And now my list, and in square brackets the value of I. Using the string method because the list contains numbers. Using concatenation like this makes your program much more user-friendly. Okay, let's run this program and see the results. Whilst this is nice, it seems a bit strange for the first item to have 0 as the number. There are a few ways we can change this. We could change the range of the loop, or we could simply add 1 to the value of I. Running this program again, we can now see the list of items each has an item number and are reprinted in a user-friendly way. Moving on, let's comment out this code and take a look at using a loop to populate a list. Firstly, I will create an empty list by simply leaving the square brackets empty. Then to demonstrate this, I will create a for loop that loops 3 times and asks the user to enter a name. After the name has been entered, I will use the append method to append each name entered to the list. Now dropping out of the loop and printing the list to see the results. Print names. Let's just move this up and recap. We can see here we created an empty list, loop 3 times, ask the user to enter a name, and each time append the value stored in the variable item to my list. Okay, now running the program and adding Jane, Dave, and Bob, and we can see that the items have now been added to the list. Lastly, we will look at 2 methods of removing items from a list. The first method we use here is pop. If you do not stipulate a list index within the brackets after pop, it will remove the last item from the list. Let's run this again and add the same names to the list, Jane, Dave, and Bob. We can now see the first print contains all 3 names, but the second print now only contains Jane and Dave because the last index was popped. I can add an index value inside the brackets of the pop method to pop a specified index. Here I will pop index 1. Testing this, we can now see that Bob remains in the list whilst Dave has been popped because he was in index 1. I will now show you the remove method. Whilst the pop method can be used to pop an item based on its index, using the remove method we can remove an item based on its value. In this case, I will remove the value of Jane from this list. I will add Jane, Dave, and Bob again, and we can now see that only Bob remains because Dave was popped from index 1, and Jane was removed using the remove method. Great job, we did it! With this introduction to lists, you should now be ready to complete some challenges. Visit computersciencecafe.com to find some list challenges to help you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy your journey of learning to code, and see you in the next video.